Tonight, I want to tell you a story. Not a story about kings. Not a story about great battles. Not a story about distant lands. This is a story about an ordinary man. A man who lived a life that looked successful from the outside. Yet every night, he went to bed carrying a weight no one could see. His name was Robert. Robert was 68 years old. He lived alone in a small town, surrounded by open fields and quiet roads. For most of his life, he had been busy working, busy paying bills, busy raising children, busy building a future. And then one day, without realizing it, the future arrived. He retired. His children moved away. The house became quiet. The calendar became empty. The days became longer, and the nights became even longer. Every evening, Robert would sit in the same chair by the window. He would watch the sun disappear behind the hills. The sky would slowly fade from gold to blue, then from blue to darkness. At first, he enjoyed the silence. But after a while, the silence began to speak. It reminded him of old regrets, old mistakes, old conversations, old wounds. Some nights he would lie awake for hours. His body felt exhausted, but his mind refused to rest. Thought after thought drifted through his head. Things he wished he had done differently. People he missed. Choices he questioned. Memories he could not change. It felt as though his mind had become an endless movie theater playing the same scenes over and over again. And no matter how hard he tried, he could not turn the screen off. One cold autumn afternoon, Robert decided to go for a walk. The air was cool. The trees were painted with shades of orange and gold. Leaves floated gently through the sky before settling on the ground. As he walked through a small park, he noticed an elderly man sitting alone on a wooden bench. The stranger seemed completely at peace. Children were playing nearby. Cars passed in the distance. The wind rustled through the trees. Yet the old man sat quietly, as if nothing in the world could disturb him. Something about him felt different. Robert couldn't explain why. Without thinking too much about it, he sat down beside him. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Then Robert sighed. A long, heavy sigh. The kind of sigh that comes from carrying too much for too long. Finally, he said, "I wish my mind would stop." The old man smiled gently. He looked toward the trees and asked, "Why?" Robert frowned. "Because it never gives me any peace." The old man nodded slowly. Then he pointed toward a small stream flowing nearby. "Do you see that water?" "Yes." "Can you stop it from moving?" "No." "Can you force it to flow backward?" "Of course not." The old man smiled again. "Then why do you expect your mind to do something that nature itself does not do?" Robert stared at the flowing water. The stream moved effortlessly around rocks and fallen branches. It never argued. It never resisted. It simply flowed. The old man continued. "Thoughts are like that stream. They move. That is their nature. The problem is not that thoughts appear. The problem is that every time a thought passes by, you jump into the water and let it carry you away." For the first time in many years, Robert sat completely silent. Something inside him shifted, not because he had found an answer, but because he had finally heard a different question. Perhaps peace was not about stopping his thoughts. Perhaps peace was learning not to follow every single one of them. The next morning, Robert woke up earlier than usual. The conversation from the day before lingered quietly in his mind. Normally, he would begin his day by turning on the television or scrolling through the news on his phone. But that morning felt different. Instead, he made a cup of coffee and sat by the window in silence. Outside, the world was slowly waking up. A bird landed on a fence post. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. For a moment, everything felt calm. Then the thoughts returned. What if I had made different choices? What if I had spent more time with my wife before she passed away? What if I had worked less? What if I had appreciated life more when I was younger? The familiar voices returned one by one. But then he remembered the old man's words. Thoughts are like the stream. For the first time, Robert didn't argue with the thoughts. He didn't chase them. He didn't try to push them away. He simply watched them. One thought appeared, then another, each one floating through his awareness like leaves drifting down a river. Some were sad, some were painful, some were completely meaningless. Yet something surprising happened. The more he watched them, the less powerful they became. By afternoon, Robert found himself returning to the park. The old man was there again, sitting on the same bench, watching the same stream, as if he had never left. Robert smiled. "You knew I'd come back." The old man laughed softly. "No." He looked at the water. "I simply knew your suffering would." Robert sat beside him. For a while, they listened to the sound of flowing water. Finally, Robert spoke. "I tried what you said, and I watched my thoughts." The old man nodded. "And what did you discover?" Robert hesitated. "They never stop." The old man smiled. "Exactly." Robert frowned. "I thought meditation was supposed to stop thoughts." The old man shook his head. "No, that is one of the biggest misunderstandings people have." He bent down and picked up a fallen leaf. Holding it in his hand, he said, "Imagine sitting beside this stream. You see leaves floating past. One leaf says you failed. Another says you are too old. Another reminds you of your mistakes. Another tells you to worry about tomorrow." He dropped the leaf into the water. It drifted away. The goal is not to stop the leaves. The goal is to stop jumping into the river after every single one. Robert stared at the moving water. The simplicity of the lesson touched something deep inside him. For years, he had been fighting his own mind, trying to silence it, trying to control it, trying to force it into peace. And the harder he fought, the more exhausted he became. The old man continued. "Most people spend their entire lives chasing peace. They believe peace exists somewhere in the future, after retirement, after success, after healing, after the next problem is solved." He smiled gently. "But peace does not live in the future. It only lives here." The old man placed his hand on the bench. "Right here." Then he pointed to the stream. "Right there." Then he pointed toward Robert's chest. "And right here." A few days later, Robert returned to the park once again. By now, it had become part of his routine, not because he expected answers, but because something about sitting near the stream made him feel lighter. The old man was waiting beneath a large oak tree. This time, he stood as Robert approached. "Come," he said. "Today, we're going for a walk." They followed a narrow trail that wound through the forest. The morning air was cool and fresh. Sunlight filtered through the leaves above them, creating shifting patterns on the ground. For a while, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of footsteps accompanied them. Eventually, the old man stopped beside a fallen log. He looked at Robert and asked, "Are you carrying it today?" Robert looked confused. "Carrying what?" The old man smiled. "The backpack." Robert glanced behind him. "I don't have a backpack." The old man nodded. "Most people don't realize they're carrying one." Then he tapped gently on Robert's chest. "It's here." For a moment, Robert said nothing. The old man continued walking. Every person carries an invisible backpack. Some fill it with regrets. Some fill it with anger. Some fill it with guilt. Some fill it with fear. And most spend their entire lives adding more weight. Robert felt a strange discomfort as he listened, because deep down, he knew exactly what the old man meant. He thought about the arguments he wished he could undo, the mistakes he still replayed, the people he had lost, the opportunities that never returned, the disappointments he had never fully released. The old man stopped beside a large stone near the trail. He picked it up and handed it to Robert. "Hold this." Robert took it. It wasn't terribly heavy at first. Then they continued walking. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. The stone seemed to grow heavier with every step. Eventually, Robert shifted it from one hand to the other. His arm began to ache. His shoulder tightened. Finally, he stopped. "I don't understand." The old man smiled. "How heavy is the stone?" Robert shrugged. "Maybe 5 pounds. And if you hold it for 1 minute, no problem. For 1 hour, my arm would hurt. For an entire day, I probably couldn't do it." The old man nodded. "The weight never changed. The suffering came from how long you carried it." Robert stared at the stone. Suddenly, the lesson became clear. The old man nodded. "The weight never changed. The suffering came from how long you carried it." Robert stared at the stone. Suddenly, the lesson became clear. The old man continued. "Most people believe their suffering comes from what happened. But often their suffering comes from carrying what happened for years." The words struck Robert deeply, because he had been carrying some things for decades. Not days, not months, decades. The old man pointed toward the forest floor. "Put the stone down." Robert released it. The relief was immediate. His arm relaxed. His shoulder softened. His body felt lighter. The old man looked at him. "That is what forgiveness feels like." Robert lowered his eyes. "Forgiveness?" "Yes." The old man smiled gently. "Not because what happened was acceptable. Not because people were right. Not because you approve of what they did. But because you no longer wish to carry the stone." The forest grew quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause. Robert thought about a man he hadn't spoken to in 20 years. A former business partner who had betrayed him. Every time he remembered the betrayal, anger still surfaced. Even after all those years, the old man seemed to sense his thoughts. "Tell me, if that man walked through these trees right now, who would suffer first?" Robert already knew the answer. Not the other man. Him. The old man nodded. "Resentment is a prison where the prisoner holds the key." Robert felt his chest tighten, then slowly soften. For years, he had believed he was protecting himself by holding on to old pain. But now he began to see something different. The pain was no longer protecting him. It was imprisoning him. They resumed walking. The trail eventually led to a small hill overlooking the valley below. The view stretched for miles. Golden trees, rolling fields, distant mountains. The old man sat down on the grass. "Look out there." Robert did. The landscape seemed endless, peaceful, silent. The old man asked quietly, "Do you know why mountains appear so calm?" Robert shook his head. "Because they don't carry yesterday." The words settled gently into silence. A bird drifted across the sky. Clouds moved slowly overhead. The old man continued. "Yesterday is gone. Tomorrow has not arrived. Yet most people live nowhere else. They spend their days regretting the past, and their nights fearing the future." Robert looked toward the horizon. For the first time, he realized how rarely he actually lived in the present. His body was here, but his mind was usually somewhere else. Somewhere behind him, or somewhere ahead. Rarely here, rarely now. The old man smiled. "The moment you stop carrying yesterday, you discover something beautiful." Robert looked at him. "What?" The old man closed his eyes and answered softly. "Life was never as heavy as you thought. The burden was not the journey. The burden was the backpack." And for the first time in many years, Robert began to wonder what it might feel like to set it down forever. The following week brought rain. Heavy rain. The kind that covered the roads in silver reflections and filled the air with the scent of wet earth. Robert stayed home for several days. And during those quiet days, something unexpected happened. The thoughts became louder. At first, he felt disappointed. He had believed he was making progress. He thought the lessons from the old man would somehow make his worries disappear. Instead, Old memories seemed to return with even greater force. One night, unable to sleep, Robert sat alone in his living room. The house was dark except for a small lamp beside his chair. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, his mind refused to rest. A memory surfaced, then another, then another. His mistakes, his regrets, his fears, his loneliness. It felt as though dozens of voices were speaking all at once. By morning, he was exhausted. When the rain finally stopped, he returned to the park. The old man was sitting beneath the oak tree, as usual. Before the old man could speak, Robert blurted out, "It's getting worse." The old man raised an eyebrow. "What is?" "My thoughts." The old man smiled. "No." Robert frowned. "What do you mean, no?" The old man pointed toward the sky. Clouds drifted slowly overhead. "Look carefully." Robert did. "The clouds are moving." "Yes." "And the sky? The sky isn't moving." The old man nodded. "Most people spend their lives believing they are the clouds. But they are the sky." Robert stared at him. The old man continued. "Thoughts come. Thoughts go. Emotions come. Emotions go. Fear comes. Fear goes. But something remains. What remains is awareness itself." Robert wasn't sure he understood. The old man stood and began walking. They followed a narrow path through the trees. Eventually, they reached a small, abandoned cabin. Its wooden walls were weathered. Its roof sagged slightly with age. The old man opened the door. Inside was a single empty room. Dust floated in beams of sunlight. The room was silent. The old man stepped inside and looked around. "Imagine this cabin is your mind." Robert nodded. Then the old man continued. "Now imagine every thought is a guest. Some guests are pleasant. Some guests are difficult. Some are noisy. Some arrive uninvited." The old man sat down on an old wooden chair. "If a guest enters this room angry, do you become angry? No. If a guest enters afraid, do you become afraid? No. If a guest enters crying, do you become their tears? Of course not." The old man smiled. "Then why do you become every thought that enters your mind?" The question hung in the air. Robert felt something inside him pause. For years, he had treated every thought as truth, every worry as reality, every fear as a warning, every regret as a permanent scar. The old man continued softly. "A thought is only a visitor. It is not the owner of the house." A gust of wind moved through the doorway. The cabin creaked gently. The old man pointed toward the open entrance. "Guests come. Guests leave. The house remains." Robert sat quietly. The simplicity of the lesson felt strangely powerful. The old man leaned forward. "Tell me something. When you were 20 years old, did you have thoughts?" "Of course." "When you were 40? "Yes." "When you were 60? "Yes." The old man smiled. "And yet all those thoughts disappeared." Robert nodded slowly. Thousands of thoughts had come and gone throughout his life. Most of them had never happened. Most of the things he worried about had vanished without consequence. Many fears had never become reality. Yet each time they appeared, he had believed them completely. The old man spoke again. "The mind creates weather. Some days are sunny. Some days are stormy. But wisdom is remembering that weather always changes." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the floor. The room glowed with quiet warmth. Finally, Robert asked, "What should I do when difficult thoughts appear?" The old man smiled. "Offer them a chair." Robert laughed. The old man laughed too. "I'm serious. When sadness arrives, let it sit. When fear arrives, let it sit. When loneliness arrives, let it sit. When regret arrives, let it sit. Do not fight them. Do not chase them away. Do not invite them to stay forever. Simply let them visit. The words settled deeply into Robert's heart, because for most of his life he had done only two things. He either fought his thoughts or surrendered to them. He had never considered a third option, to simply observe them, to allow them, to let them come and go. As they left the cabin and stepped back into the afternoon sunlight, Robert noticed something unusual. The forest looked brighter. The air felt lighter. Nothing outside had changed, but something inside had. For the first time, he understood that peace was not the absence of thoughts. Peace was the ability to remain calm while thoughts came and went. Just like clouds crossing the sky. Just like guests passing through a house. Just like rain falling and then disappearing. A few mornings later, Robert arrived at the park earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen above the horizon. The world felt quiet, still, unhurried. As he approached the old oak tree, he noticed something unusual. The old man was holding an old pocket watch. Its silver surface was scratched with age. The chain hung loosely from his hand. When Robert sat down beside him, the old man handed him the watch. "It's broken," he said. Robert turned it over in his hands. The hands had stopped moving. The glass was cracked. The watch clearly hadn't worked in years. "Why are you carrying this?" Robert asked. The old man smiled. "Because most people live exactly like this watch." Robert looked puzzled. The old man pointed to the frozen hands. "They spend their lives trapped in a time that no longer exists." The words immediately caught Robert's attention. The old man continued. "Some live 20 years in the past, reliving mistakes, reliving losses, reliving conversations that ended long ago. And others live 20 years in the future, worrying about things that have not happened, preparing for disasters that may never come." The old man continued. "Some live 20 years in the past, reliving mistakes, reliving losses, reliving conversations that ended long ago. And others live 20 years in the future, worrying about things that have not happened, preparing for disasters that may never come." The old man looked directly at Robert. Very few people live where life is actually happening. Robert lowered his eyes. He knew exactly what the old man meant. Even now, as he sat in the park, part of his mind was already worrying about next month. His doctor's appointment, his finances, his health, the future, always the future. The old man pointed toward a nearby bench. "Look at that bench." Robert did. "What do you see?" "A bench." The old man nodded. "Is it causing you stress?" "No." "What about that tree?" "No." "The birds?" "No." "The grass?" "No." The old man smiled. "Then where is your anxiety coming from?" Robert opened his mouth, then closed it. The answer was obvious. Not from the bench, not from the tree, not from the birds. The anxiety was coming from thoughts about things that weren't happening right now. The old man leaned back. "Most suffering is borrowed from the future." The sentence lingered in the morning air. Robert repeated it quietly. "Borrowed from the future." The old man nodded. "You suffer today because of something that might happen tomorrow, and then tomorrow arrives. And often, what you feared never happens." Robert laughed softly. The old man laughed too, because both of them knew it was true. How many sleepless nights have been wasted worrying about things that never occurred? How many hours have been sacrificed to imaginary disasters? How much life had been missed while preparing for problems that never arrived? The old man picked up a small stick and drew a line in the dirt. "This line is your life." Then he placed a small pebble near the middle. "This pebble is the present moment." Robert watched carefully. The old man then pointed to the long sections before and after the pebble. Most people ignore the pebble. They live here. He pointed to the past. Or here. He pointed to the future. But life only exists at the pebble. Robert stared at the tiny stone. Such a small thing, yet it represented the only moment that was real. The old man continued. When your wife was alive, were there difficult days? Of course. Were there beautiful days? Yes. The old man nodded. Did you know at the time how precious those ordinary moments were? Robert's eyes softened. No. The answer came almost as a whisper. Because he remembered now. The dinners they shared. The walks. The simple conversations. The mornings. The evenings. Back then, those moments had seemed ordinary. Now they felt priceless. The old man smiled gently. That is the tragedy of the human mind. We spend today wishing for tomorrow. Then tomorrow arrives. And we miss today. A breeze moved through the trees. The leaves shimmered in the sunlight. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Robert asked, "So how do I stop worrying?" The old man looked toward the stream. "You don't." Robert frowned. The old man chuckled. "You stop believing every worry deserves your attention." The old man picked up a leaf floating nearby. This leaf is a thought. He dropped it into the water. It drifted away immediately. You can watch it. You can notice it. But you do not have to follow it. The stream carried the leaf farther and farther downstream until it disappeared completely. The old man smiled. Most worries disappear the same way, if you stop feeding them. The morning sun continued climbing into the sky. The park slowly filled with people. Joggers, dog walkers, children laughing in the distance. Life unfolding exactly as it always had. And suddenly, Robert noticed something remarkable. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about next week. He wasn't replaying yesterday. He wasn't calculating every possible future outcome. He was simply sitting on a bench, breathing, listening, existing. Nothing extraordinary had happened. It felt extraordinary because he was finally experiencing a moment without trying to escape it. The old man stood. "Come, where are we going?" Robert asked. The old man smiled. "Nowhere." Then he began walking. And for perhaps the first time in his entire life, Robert understood that nowhere was exactly where he needed to be. Several days later, Robert was standing in his backyard when he noticed something he had ignored for years. Behind the house was a small garden, or at least it had once been a garden. Now it was little more than a patch of weeds and overgrown grass. The wooden fence leaned slightly to one side. Dead branches covered parts of the ground. The flower beds were barely visible beneath layers of neglect. For a long moment, Robert stood there staring. A memory surfaced. His wife had loved that garden. Years ago, she spent countless afternoons planting flowers, watering them, pulling weeds, caring for every small detail. Back then, the garden had been full of color, full of life. After she passed away, Robert had stopped paying attention to it. At first, he told himself he was too busy. Then months became years. And little by little, the garden disappeared. That afternoon, he told the old man about it. The old man listened quietly. Then he smiled. "I think you've just discovered your next lesson." The following morning, Robert began cleaning the garden. At first, the work felt overwhelming. There were weeds everywhere. The soil was hard. The plants that remained looked tired and fragile. Part of him wanted to quit, but he continued. 1 hour became 2. 2 became 3. Day after day, he returned. Slowly, the garden began to change. And as it changed, something inside Robert began to change as well. One afternoon, while they sat beside the stream, the old man asked, "What grows in a garden?" Robert shrugged. "Flowers, weeds, trees, vegetables." The old man nodded. "And what determines what grows?" Robert thought for a moment. "What you plant." The old man smiled. "And what else?" "What you care for." The old man pointed gently toward Robert's chest. The mind works the same way. Robert looked down. The old man continued. If you spend years feeding resentment, resentment grows. If you spend years feeding fear, fear grows. If you spend years feeding gratitude, gratitude grows. The lesson felt surprisingly simple. Yet Robert knew it was true. For years he had watered his worries, fed his regrets, protected his fears, repeated old stories again and again. Without realizing it, he had become the gardener of his own suffering. The old man picked up a small seed from the ground. Holding it carefully between his fingers, he said, "Every thought is a seed. Every habit is a seed. Every belief is a seed." Then he opened his hand. The question is not whether you are planting. The question is what you are planting. The word stayed with Robert. That evening, he sat quietly on his porch. The sun was setting. The sky glowed with shades of gold and orange. Normally, he would have spent that time worrying about tomorrow. Instead, he looked around, and he noticed something, a gentle breeze, the sound of birds returning to their nests, the warmth of a cup of tea in his hands, the smell of freshly turned soil from the garden. Small things, ordinary things, things he had overlooked for years. For the first time, he felt gratitude, not for something extraordinary, not for success, not for achievement, simply for being alive. The next day, he shared this with the old man. The old man smiled knowingly. Most people believe gratitude comes after happiness. Robert nodded. That seemed reasonable. The old man shook his head. No, gratitude comes first. Happiness follows. The old man smiled knowingly. Most people believe gratitude comes after happiness. Robert nodded. That seemed reasonable. The old man shook his head. No, gratitude comes first. Happiness follows. Robert sat silently. The old man continued. A grateful heart notices abundance. An anxious mind notices scarcity. A grateful heart sees what is here. An anxious mind sees only what is missing. The stream flowed quietly beside them. The sunlight sparkled across the water. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the old man asked, "Tell me, Robert, if someone gave you $10 million today, would you be happy?" Robert laughed. "Probably." The old man nodded. "And if tomorrow they took away your ability to see?" Robert's smile faded. The old man continued softly. "How much of that money would you give to have your eyesight back?" Robert didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was obvious. All of it. Perhaps more. The old man smiled gently. You already possess treasures that money cannot buy. Yet because they're always with you, you rarely notice them. Robert felt a lump rise in his throat. His eyes, his hearing, his breath, his ability to walk, the people he still loved, the mornings he still woke up to, the simple gift of another day. For so long, he had focused on what was missing. He had forgotten to notice what remained. As the sun began to set behind the trees, the old man stood. The golden light bathed the park in warmth. The world seemed peaceful, almost sacred. The old man looked toward the horizon and spoke quietly. Life is always offering gifts. The trouble is that most people are too distracted to open them. Robert watched the fading sunlight, and in that moment, he realized something beautiful. The garden behind his house was not the only thing beginning to bloom. His heart was too. One quiet Saturday morning, the old man asked Robert a question he had never asked before. Is there somewhere you've been avoiding? The question caught Robert off guard. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then his eyes drifted toward the distant hills, and he immediately knew the answer. There was a place he had not visited in over 3 years, a place he had promised himself he would return to someday, but never had. That afternoon, he drove to a small lake about 20 miles from town. The road felt familiar. Panfidi familiar. Every turn awakened a memory. Every mile carried him deeper into the past. Eventually, he arrived. The lake was exactly as he remembered. Quiet, still, timeless. Near the shore stood an old wooden dock stretching into the water. The same dock where he and his wife had spent countless evenings together, watching sunsets, talking about life, saying very little, yet somehow understanding everything. Robert stepped onto the weatherboards. They creaked softly beneath his feet. The lake reflected the sky like glass. For a long moment, he simply stood there. Then the memories came. Not gently, not slowly, all at once. Her smile, her laughter, the way she held his hand, the sound of her voice, the final weeks, the hospital room, the goodbye he never felt ready to say. A wave of grief rose inside him, stronger than anything he had felt in years. His chest tightened, his eyes filled with tears. Part of him wanted to run, to leave, to distract himself, to escape. But another part remembered the lessons he had learned. The guests in the house, the leaves on the stream, the invisible backpack. So instead of running, he sat down and allowed the grief to stay. The wind moved softly across the lake. The water shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Tears rolled down his face. And for the first time in years, he did not fight them. He simply let them fall. Later that evening, he told the old man what had happened. The old man listened quietly. Then he asked, "When your wife died, what disappeared?" Robert swallowed hard. "She did." The old man nodded. "Her body disappeared." Robert looked down. The old man continued gently. "But is that all she was?" The question lingered in the silence. Robert thought about it. The old man continued. "Does love disappear?" Robert shook his head. "No." "Does kindness disappear?" "No." "The memories?" "No." "The lessons she taught you?" "No." The old man smiled softly. "Then perhaps more remains than you think." The stream flowed quietly beside them. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Robert whispered, "But I still miss her." The old man's eyes softened. "Of course you do. Love leaves fingerprints on the heart." The sentence struck him deeply. The old man continued, "Grief is not a sign that something is wrong. Grief is the price we pay for loving deeply." A bird crossed the sky overhead. The afternoon light reflected on the moving water. The old man pointed toward the stream. "Look carefully." Robert did. The water flowing past now was not the same water that had flowed past a minute earlier. Yet the stream remained, always changing, always moving, still itself. The old man smiled. "Life is like that. Nothing stays. Everything changes. Every season, every moment, every breath." Robert watched the flowing water. For years, he had treated change as an enemy. Something unfair, something cruel, something to resist. But now he saw it differently. Without change, children would never grow. Seeds would never become trees. Sunsets would never arrive. Pain would never heal. The old man spoke softly. "The reason we suffer is not because things change. It's because we wish they wouldn't." The truth of those words settled into Robert's heart. He realized he had spent years arguing with reality, wanting yesterday back, wanting time to reverse, wanting life to be different from what it was. And that fight had exhausted him. The old man looked toward the horizon. "Tell me, Robert, if you could have one more day with her, what would you do?" Robert smiled through his tears. The answer came instantly. "Nothing special." The old man raised an eyebrow. "No." Robert shook his head. "We drink coffee, talk, take a walk, watch the sunset." The old man smiled. "Exactly. Because in the end, the things that matter most are rarely extraordinary. They're the simple moments we fail to notice while they're happening. The ordinary moments that later become priceless memories." The sun slowly began to set. Golden light stretched across the water. The lake glowed with warmth. Robert felt tears in his eyes once more. But this time they felt different. Not tears of resistance. Not tears of bitterness. Simply tears of love. The old man stood, and before leaving, he said something Robert would never forget. People we love never truly leave. They become part of how we see the world, part of how we speak, part of how we love, part of who we are. The evening breeze moved gently across the lake, and for the first time since losing his wife, Robert understood something profound. The pain was not proof that love had ended. The pain was proof that love had existed. And love, in its deepest form, never really disappears. It simply changes shape, like water, like seasons, like life itself. The weeks passed quietly. Spring slowly gave way to summer. The trees grew fuller. The days became longer. And somewhere along the way, Robert noticed something unexpected. He no longer felt the same urgency to fix himself. For years, he had treated life like a problem that needed solving. There was always something missing, something broken, something waiting to be repaired. But now, as he sat on his porch in the mornings or worked in his garden during the afternoons, he found himself simply being. Not every day was perfect. He still had moments of sadness, moments of loneliness, moments of uncertainty, but they no longer controlled him. They came. They stayed for a while. Then they left, like weather passing through the sky. One morning, Robert walked toward the park as he always did. The sun was just beginning to rise. The grass shimmered with dew. Birds sang from the trees. The world felt peaceful. Yet something felt different. When he arrived at the old oak tree, the bench was empty. Robert looked around. No sign of the old man. He waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 30 minutes. Still nothing. The next day, he returned. Again, the bench was empty. And the day after that, empty. A strange sadness settled over him. The old man had become an important part of his life. A guide, a teacher, a friend. And now he was gone. For several days, Robert searched throughout the park. He asked regular visitors if they had seen him. No one seemed to know who he was talking about. Some even looked confused, as if they had never noticed the old man at all. Finally, after nearly 2 weeks, Robert stopped searching. One evening, he sat beside the stream alone. The same stream where everything had begun. The water flowed exactly as it always had. The sunlight danced across its surface. Leaves drifted slowly downstream. And as he sat there, a realization began to emerge. All those months, he had believed the old man was giving him wisdom. But perhaps that wasn't entirely true. The old man had never really given him answers. Instead, he had asked questions. Questions that helped Robert discover the answers for himself. A soft breeze moved through the trees. Robert closed his eyes, and memories of their conversations returned. The stream, the backpack, the guests, the garden, the lake. Each lesson seemed to connect to the next, like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. Then he remembered something the old man had said during their very first meeting. Perhaps peace is not about stopping your thoughts. Perhaps peace is learning not to follow every single one of them. Robert smiled. For months, he had been looking outside himself for peace, looking for guidance, looking for certainty, looking for someone to show him the way. And all along, the peace he was searching for had been quietly waiting within him. The stream continued flowing, just as it had before the old man appeared, just as it would after he was gone. And suddenly, Robert understood. The stream had been the teacher too, always changing, always moving, never resisting, never holding on. Life was asking him to do the same. As the sun began to set, Robert noticed an object resting beneath the old oak tree. Curious, he walked over. It was a small wooden box, Simple. Weathered. Inside was a folded piece of paper. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. There was only one sentence written inside. A sentence so simple that at first it almost seemed disappointing. It read, "The peace you seek has been sitting beside you all along." Robert stared at the words, then slowly looked around. The trees, the sky, the stream, the birds, the wind, and finally himself. Tears filled his eyes. Not tears of sadness, not tears of grief, but tears of recognition, because for the first time, he truly understood. Peace had never been hidden. Life had never been withholding it. The problem was that he had been looking everywhere except the present moment, always chasing another destination, another achievement, another solution, another tomorrow. Meanwhile, life had been quietly unfolding right here. In a cup of coffee, in a sunset, in a conversation, in the sound of moving water, in a single breath. The evening light painted the sky with gold and amber. The stream reflected the colors like liquid fire. Robert sat down on the bench one final time, not because he needed answers, not because he needed fixing, simply because it felt good to be there. For a long while, he listened to the water, and then something happened. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No great revelation. No mystical vision. No dramatic transformation. Only silence. Gentle. Peaceful. Complete. And in that silence, Robert discovered something he had spent his entire life searching for. He discovered that this moment, just this moment, was enough. One evening, as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon, Robert sat alone at his kitchen table. The house was quiet. The garden outside rested beneath the fading light. A gentle silence filled every corner of the room. On the table in front of him sat a blank sheet of paper. For several minutes, he simply stared at it. Then a thought entered his mind. If he could send a letter to the younger version of himself, what would he say? Not the 20-year-old version, not the reckless teenager, but the man in his 30s, the man who was rushing through life, the man who believed happiness was always waiting somewhere ahead. Slowly, Robert picked up a pen, and he began to write. My dear younger self, I know you're busy. I know you believe there isn't enough time. You wake up thinking about tomorrow. You fall asleep worrying about the future. You believe that once you achieve enough, earn enough, save enough, accomplish enough, you will finally be able to relax. But I have lived long enough to tell you something important. That day never arrives, because the mind always creates another destination, another goal, another reason to postpone happiness. You keep telling yourself, just a little longer, just one more year, just one more promotion, just one more achievement. But life is happening while you're making those plans. The ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the family dinner, the walk with your wife, the laughter of your children, the quiet moments you barely notice. One day, those moments will become your most precious memories. So pay attention. Be present, not because life is perfect, but because life is temporary. Robert paused, his eyes filled with emotion. Then he continued writing. You spend too much time fighting reality. You carry old mistakes like stones in your pockets. You replay conversations that ended years ago. You punish yourself for being human. Please stop. You were never meant to be perfect. You were only meant to be alive. And being alive includes making mistakes. It includes uncertainty. It includes heartbreak. It includes loss. Do not wait for life to become easy before allowing yourself to be happy. Peace does not come from controlling life. Peace comes from trusting it. The room remained silent. Outside, the stars slowly appeared overhead. And as Robert folded the letter, he realized something. The letter was not really for his younger self. It was for anyone who had ever felt lost, anyone who had ever carried regret, anyone who had ever forgotten how beautiful ordinary life can be. Anyone who had spent years searching for peace in distant places, when all along, peace had been quietly waiting in the present moment. Late that night, Robert stepped outside. The sky was clear. Thousands of stars filled the darkness above. He stood there for a long time, looking upward, breathing slowly, feeling deeply connected to everything around him. The earth beneath his feet, the cool night air, the endless sky, the distant sound of crickets, the gentle movement of leaves in the wind. Nothing extraordinary was happening, and yet it felt extraordinary, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't searching for another moment. He was fully inside this one, and that made all the difference. Late one evening, Robert found himself unable to sleep, not because he was worried, not because his mind was racing. In fact, it was quite the opposite. His mind was calm. His heart was calm. Yet something gently pulled him outside. So he stepped onto the porch and looked up. The sky was clear. Thousands of stars filled the darkness above. Tiny points of light scattered across the vastness of space. Robert had seen stars his entire life, but tonight felt different. Tonight, he wasn't simply looking at them. He was noticing them, really noticing them. The silence of the night seemed deeper than usual. The air felt cool against his skin. Somewhere far away, an owl called into the darkness. Everything felt still, and yet everything was alive. As Robert gazed upward, he became aware of something strange. The problems that once seemed enormous now felt very small. The worries that had stolen countless nights of sleep seemed distant, not unimportant, just smaller, less solid, less absolute. For years, he had lived inside a world that revolved around himself. His plans, his fears, his regrets, his future, his past, his story. But beneath the stars, that story suddenly seemed much larger than one person. He remembered something the old man had once said. You are a wave, but you're also the ocean. At the time, Robert had not fully understood. Now he began to. A wave rises. A wave falls. A wave appears separate. It never leaves the ocean. It is made of the ocean. It returns to the ocean. It was never truly separate in the first place. The thought settled quietly within him. For most of his life, Robert had believed he was alone, separate from others, separate from life, separate from the world around him. But sitting beneath the stars, he felt something different. The same air moved through every living creature. The same earth supported every step. The same sky stretched above every human being. The same mystery surrounded everyone, young and old, rich and poor, happy and sad. Everyone was sharing this brief journey together. A shooting star crossed the sky. For a brief second, it illuminated the darkness. Then it disappeared. Robert smiled. The moment reminded him of life itself. Brief, beautiful, temporary, and somehow, because it was temporary, even more precious. For years, he had feared impermanence, feared aging, feared loss, feared endings, but now he saw them differently. A sunset is beautiful because it ends. A flower is beautiful because it fades. A season is beautiful because it changes. Even life itself becomes meaningful because it does not last forever. Without endings, there would be no urgency to love, no reason to appreciate, no reason to be present. The stars continued shining above him. Silent teachers scattered across the night sky. Robert closed his eyes for a moment, and when he did, he noticed something else. The voice inside his head, the voice that had spent decades judging, comparing, criticizing, demanding, the voice that always wanted more. More success, more certainty, more control, more proof that he was enough. The old man had never called it ego. But Robert understood now. That restless voice had been trying to protect him, trying to create safety, trying to build an identity. Yet it had also created much of his suffering, because no matter how much it achieved, it was never satisfied. It always wanted another reason to feel complete, another reason to feel secure, another reason to feel worthy. But beneath the stars, Robert realized something profound. He did not need to earn his worth. He did not need to prove his value. He did not need to become someone else. He already belonged, just as the trees belonged, just as the river belonged, just as the stars belonged. Existence itself was enough. A deep sense of peace moved through him. Not excitement, not happiness, something quieter, something older, a feeling of coming home, not to a place, but to himself. The wind moved softly through the garden. The flowers swayed gently in the darkness. And for the first time in his life, Robert felt completely connected. Connected to the earth beneath his feet. Connected to the night sky above him. Connected to every person who had ever loved. Every person who had ever grieved. Every person who had ever searched for peace. Perhaps this was what wisdom really meant. Not knowing all the answers. Not understanding every mystery. But finally becoming comfortable with the mystery itself. Robert opened his eyes once more. The stars still shined above him. Patient, silent, timeless. He smiled softly, then whispered into the night. Thank you. Not to anyone in particular. Not to the stars. Not to the universe. Simply thank you. For this life. For this moment. For this breath. And beneath the endless sky, surrounded by silence and starlight, Robert stood peacefully. No longer searching. No longer chasing. No longer waiting. Simply here. Exactly where he was meant to be. The next morning, Robert returned to the stream. It had been many months since the day he first met the old man. Many lessons, many realizations, many quiet transformations. Yet as he stood beside the water, something struck him. The stream had not changed. It flowed exactly as it always had. The same gentle current, the same winding path, the same soft sounds as water moved around stones and roots. Life had changed. He had changed. But the stream remained faithful to its nature. Flowing. Always flowing. Robert sat on the old bench beneath the oak tree. The wood felt warm beneath the morning sun. Nearby, a dragonfly hovered above the water. A leaf drifted slowly downstream. Everything seemed simple, ordinary, and yet somehow perfect. For a long time, he simply listened. No questions, no searching, no effort, just listening. And in that silence, a memory surfaced. The very first day, he had sat beside the old man. Back then, he had arrived carrying questions. Heavy questions. How do I find peace? How do I stop worrying? How do I let go of regret? How do I heal? How do I become happy? He smiled softly, because now he understood something he could not have understood back then. The answers were never hidden. The answers were hidden beneath the noise. For most of his life, he had been trying to improve every moment, fix every problem, control every outcome, protect himself from pain, protect himself from uncertainty, protect himself from change. But life had never asked him to do any of those things. Life had only asked him to participate, to show up, to be present, to witness, to experience. A breeze moved gently through the branches above him. The sunlight danced across the water. Robert closed his eyes, and for a moment, he imagined speaking to the old man one final time. Was this enlightenment? He asked quietly. The answer seemed to arrive from the wind itself. No, this is simply being alive. And somehow that answer felt more beautiful than any mystical experience he could imagine. Because being alive was enough. It always had been. It always would be. The stream continued flowing. The birds continued singing. The trees continued swaying. Life continued unfolding. Without rushing. Without forcing. Without demanding anything from him. And sitting there beneath the oak tree, Robert felt a peace deeper than words. A peace that needed no explanation. A peace that had been patiently waiting for him beneath every fear, beneath every regret, beneath every restless thought. A peace that had never left him, not even once. The afternoon slowly faded into evening. Golden sunlight stretched across the fields. Long shadows drifted across the grass. The stream continued its endless journey, and Robert remained beside it, not because he was waiting for something, not because he was searching for another lesson, simply because it felt good to sit there, to listen, to breathe, to be. The years ahead remained unknown. There would still be challenges. There would still be moments of sadness, moments of uncertainty, moments when life felt difficult, but somehow that no longer troubled him, because he finally understood something simple. Life had never promised certainty. It had only offered this moment, and this moment was enough. A bird landed on a nearby branch. For a few seconds, it sat perfectly still. Then, without warning, it flew away. Robert watched until it disappeared beyond the trees. And he smiled. Nothing had asked the bird to stay. Nothing had tried to hold it. Nothing had resisted its departure. It came. It stayed. It left. Just as everything does. Thoughts arrive. Thoughts leave. People arrive. People leave. Seasons arrive. Seasons leave. Life flows. Like the stream. Always changing. Always moving. Always becoming something new. The sun slowly descended toward the horizon. The sky became softer, warmer, gentler. Orange melted into gold. Gold melted into pink. Pink slowly dissolved into blue. The beauty of the evening seemed impossible to describe, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was so ordinary. This sunset had happened thousands of times before. Yet tonight, Robert was seeing it, really seeing it, perhaps for the first time. For most of his life, sunsets had happened while he was distracted, busy, thinking, planning, worrying. Tonight, there was nothing else to do, nothing else to become. Only this sunset, only this breath, only this moment. And somehow, that felt like freedom. As darkness slowly approached, the first stars began to appear. One by one, quietly, patiently. The same stars that had watched over countless generations. The same stars that had shined above every joy and every sorrow. Every birth, every goodbye, every beginning, every ending. Robert leaned back and watched them emerge. His breathing slowed. The muscles in his shoulders relaxed. His body felt lighter. His mind felt spacious, like a room whose windows had finally been opened. A cool evening breeze drifted through the trees. The leaves whispered softly. The sound blended with the distant murmur of the stream. Together, they formed a gentle rhythm. Nature's own lullaby. The kind of sound that asks nothing from you. The kind of sound that allows the mind to rest. As night deepened, Robert became aware of the silence between sounds. The silence beneath the breeze. The silence beneath the flowing water. The silence beneath every thought. A living silence. A peaceful silence. A silence that had always been there, waiting patiently beneath the noise of everyday life. For years, he had feared silence. Now he treasured it, because within silence, he had discovered something remarkable. He had discovered himself, not the self made of worries, not the self made of memories, not the self made of expectations. Something deeper, something quieter, something that had always existed beneath every changing experience. The stars shine brighter now. The world seems slower, softer, gentler. And as Robert sat beneath the night sky, he felt no need to hold onto anything. Not the past, not the future, not even the present. Everything could come, everything could go, and peace would remain. The stream continued flowing. The stars continued shining. The earth continued turning. Life continued unfolding, and Robert simply rested within it, like a leaf floating effortlessly downstream, like a cloud drifting through an open sky, like a wave returning to the ocean. No resistance, no struggle, no fear, only trust, only presence, only peace. The night grew deeper, and slowly, gently, Robert closed his eyes, listening to the stream, listening to the wind, listening to the quiet rhythm of his own breath. In and out, in and out, the same breath that had carried him through every season of life, the same breath that connected this moment to the next, the same breath that asked for nothing except awareness. And with each breath, he felt himself sinking deeper into stillness, deeper into calm, deeper into rest, as though the entire universe were gently whispering, "There is nowhere else you need to be. There is nothing else you need to become. You are already home." The words seemed to dissolve into the night, into the stars, into the silence, into the flowing stream, and finally, into sleep. The night continued quietly. The stars remained above. The stream continued its journey through the darkness. And somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, Robert found himself listening more deeply than ever before. Not listening with his ears, listening with his whole being. The world seemed slower now. The thoughts that once demanded attention had become distant, like faint echoes disappearing beyond the hills. A memory appeared, then faded. A feeling appeared, then faded. A thought appeared, then faded. Everything moved like clouds drifting across a vast sky. Nothing stayed. Nothing needed to stay. Robert noticed how peaceful that felt. For so much of life, he had tried to hold on to good moments, hold on to people, hold on to youth, hold on to certainty. Yet life had always been moving, just like the stream. And perhaps the beauty of life was not found in holding. Perhaps it was found in allowing things to arrive, allowing things to leave, allowing life to unfold in its own way. A cool breeze touched his face. The air smelled of pine trees and earth. Somewhere nearby, the gentle sound of water continued flowing over smooth stones. The rhythm was comforting, ancient, timeless, as though the earth itself were breathing. Robert imagined every person in the world sleeping beneath the same sky. Children, parents, grandparents, people celebrating, people grieving, people beginning new chapters, people ending old ones. Millions of lives unfolding at once. Different stories, different journeys, yet all connected by the same mystery of being alive. For a moment, he felt immense compassion. For strangers, for friends, for himself. Everyone was carrying something. Everyone was learning. Everyone was doing the best they could with the understanding they had. And somehow that realization softened his heart even more. The stars seemed brighter now. The darkness felt warm rather than empty. The silence felt welcoming rather than lonely. Everything appeared exactly as it was, and exactly as it needed to be. The stream flowed. The wind moved. The earth rested. The sky watched. Nothing rushed. Nothing forced. Nothing resisted. Nature simply trusted itself. The trees did not worry about tomorrow. The moon did not question whether it was enough. The stream did not wonder if it was flowing correctly. Everything simply expressed its nature. Effortlessly, gracefully, completely. Robert smiled softly. For years he had believed peace was something to achieve, something to earn, something hidden behind effort and struggle. But peace had never been hidden. Peace had been present all along, inside every breath, inside every quiet moment, inside every ordinary day, waiting patiently to be noticed. The night grew deeper. His body felt heavier, comfortably heavy, the kind of heaviness that arrives just before sleep. His breathing slowed naturally. In and out, in and out. Each breath softer than the one before. Each breath carrying away a little more tension, a little more effort, a little more resistance. The stars above seemed endless. The silence seemed endless. The stream seemed endless. And within that endlessness, Robert felt safe, completely safe, as though life itself were gently holding him, supporting him, guiding him, without demanding anything in return. A profound stillness filled his awareness. Not empty, alive, peaceful, warm, the kind of stillness that cannot be created, only discovered, the kind of stillness that exists beneath every thought, beneath every fear, beneath every story. And resting within that stillness, Robert understood one final truth. Nothing was missing. Nothing had ever been missing. Life was already complete. This breath was complete. This moment was complete, just as it was. The stream continued flowing through the darkness. The stars continued shining above. And somewhere beyond words, beyond thoughts, beyond effort, Robert surrendered completely to the gentle rhythm of the night, into silence, into peace, into rest. And as sleep finally arrived, it arrived softly, like moonlight upon water, like a leaf settling upon the earth, like a stream returning to the ocean. Effortless, natural, complete. Good night, and may your heart be peaceful. May your mind be quiet. May your sleep be deep. And may you remember, even in your dreams, that the peace you seek has always been within you. Several weeks passed. Summer slowly settled over the valley. The mornings arrived wrapped in golden light. The evenings drifted gently into cool silence. And life continued exactly as it always had. The stream flowed. The birds sang. The wind moved through the trees. Nothing extraordinary happened. And yet Robert noticed something remarkable. He no longer felt the need for extraordinary things. For most of his life, he had believed happiness would arrive with a dramatic moment, a promotion, a success, a breakthrough, a solution, some event that would finally change everything. But now he saw life differently. The moments that mattered most were often the quietest ones. A warm cup of coffee, the sound of rain against a window, the scent of fresh earth after a storm, the feeling of sunlight on his face, the laughter of someone he loved. Simple things, things that had always been there. One morning, before sunrise, Robert walked through the garden. Tiny drops of dew rested on the flowers. Each droplet reflected the first light of dawn. For a moment, he stopped and simply looked. The sight lasted only seconds. Soon the sun would rise. The dew would disappear. The moment would be gone. Yet because it was temporary, it felt precious. Robert smiled. Impermanence no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a teacher. Everything changes. Everything moves. Everything transforms. And because of that, everything becomes valuable. The morning continued unfolding around him. The sky brightened. Birds filled the air with song. The world awakened once more. And Robert found himself feeling grateful. Not because life was perfect, not because every question had been answered, but because he was finally present enough to notice life happening. For many years he had rushed through mornings, thinking about the next thing, the next task, the next problem, the next goal. Now there was nowhere else to be, only here, only now, and somehow that felt like freedom. The days passed gently, one blending into the next, not boring, not repetitive, peaceful, like waves moving across a calm ocean. And the more Robert slowed down, the more beauty he discovered. A butterfly resting on a flower, the changing shape of clouds, the sound of leaves moving in the breeze, the rhythm of his own breathing. Life seemed full of small miracles, miracles he had ignored for decades. One evening he sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky glowed with orange and gold. A soft wind moved across the fields, and a thought appeared. Not a troubling thought, not a fearful thought, a simple one. How much of life had he missed while searching for something else? The question lingered quietly, not with regret, just curiosity. For years he had assumed happiness lived somewhere ahead, somewhere beyond the horizon. Yet every time he reached a horizon, another appeared. The search never ended, until he stopped searching. And only then did he discover what had been waiting all along. The present moment. The only place life has ever existed. The only place peace has ever existed. The only place love has ever existed. The evening grew darker. Stars began appearing overhead, and Robert sat quietly beneath them. No questions, no expectations, no need for answers, only gratitude. Gratitude for another day, another breath, another chance to witness the miracle of existence. The stars seemed brighter than usual, or perhaps he was simply paying closer attention. The universe felt vast, yet somehow intimate, mysterious, yet familiar. And beneath that endless sky, Robert felt something he had once believed impossible. He felt completely at home, not because everything was certain, but because uncertainty no longer frightened him. Life would continue changing. Seasons would continue changing. His body would continue changing. One day, everything he knew would change. And that was all right, because the stream had taught him something important. Change is not the opposite of life. Change is life. The wind whispered through the trees. The stars watched silently overhead, and Robert rested peacefully within the great unfolding mystery of existence, not trying to understand it, not trying to control it, simply allowing himself to be part of it. And for the first time in many years, that felt more than enough. The days continued passing quietly. Summer slowly matured. The garden flourished. The stream flowed. The stars appeared each evening and disappeared each morning. And life continued its gentle rhythm. One afternoon, Robert sat beneath the shade of an old maple tree. A warm breeze moved through the branches above him. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating shifting patterns across the grass. Everything felt peaceful. Yet as he sat there, he noticed something. A leaf detached from a branch high above. It floated slowly downward, turning, dancing, drifting wherever the wind carried it. Eventually, it settled softly upon the earth. The moment lasted only seconds. But Robert continued watching the leaf long after it had landed, because something about it felt familiar. For most of his life, he had resisted the winds of change. When life moved in unexpected directions, he fought against it. When plans changed, he became frustrated. When losses came, he resisted. When uncertainty appeared, he worried. He had spent years trying to control a world that could never be controlled. But the leaf had done something different. It had trusted the wind, not because it knew where it would land, but because resisting would have changed nothing. The realization settled gently within him. How much suffering had come from trying to control things beyond his reach? How many sleepless nights? How many anxious days? How many fears? The wind continued moving through the trees. The leaf remained where it had landed. And for a moment, Robert imagined life speaking through nature itself. Flow with me. Trust me. You do not need to know every step. The message felt simple, yet deeply comforting. The afternoon drifted quietly toward evening. Clouds moved slowly across the sky. Birds crossed the horizon. The world seemed perfectly content to unfold without interference. Nothing hurried, nothing forced. Everything arrived in its own time. The flowers bloomed when they were ready. The fruit ripened when it was ready. The sun rose when it was ready. The stars appeared when they were ready. Only human beings seemed determined to rush everything, to force outcomes, to demand certainty, to control what could not be controlled. Robert smiled softly. Perhaps wisdom was not learning how to control life. Perhaps wisdom was learning how to trust it. The evening arrived gently. The sky transformed into shades of amber and gold. The stream reflected the fading light like liquid glass. And once again, Robert found himself sitting beside the water. The familiar sound soothed him immediately. The steady movement, the endless flow, the simple honesty of the stream. It never pretended to be anything else. Never rushed. Never hesitated. Never looked backward. Never worried about where it would eventually end. It simply moved, moment by moment, curve by curve, season by season. And perhaps that was why it felt so peaceful. The stream accepted its nature completely. As darkness slowly approached, Robert became aware of his breathing. Slow, easy, natural, in and out, in and out. Nothing forced, nothing controlled, just life expressing itself. He realized that breathing had been teaching him the same lesson all along. Every breath arrives, every breath leaves. Holding on to either one is impossible. The beauty exists in the flow itself, the giving and receiving, the arriving and departing, the endless dance of existence. Night settled over the valley. The first stars appeared overhead. The world grew quiet. And within that quiet, Robert felt an unfamiliar sense of trust. Trust in life. Trust in change. Trust in the unknown. Not because he suddenly knew what tomorrow would bring, but because he finally understood that he didn't need to know. The stream had never known where every turn would lead. It continued flowing. The trees never knew what storms might come, yet they continued growing. The stars never questioned whether they belonged in the sky. They simply shined. And perhaps human beings were meant to live that way too. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, but trustingly, one moment at a time. The night deepened. The stars multiplied above him. The stream whispered softly in the darkness. And Robert sat peacefully within the vast silence. Not searching, not striving, not resisting, only listening. Listening to the wind, listening to the water, listening to the quiet wisdom that had always existed beneath the noise. The wisdom that says, everything changes, everything passes, everything flows. And that is not something to fear. That is something to trust. The stars continued shining. The stream continued flowing. The earth continued turning. And within that great unfolding mystery, Robert rested completely at ease, like a leaf carried gently by the wind, like a cloud drifting across an endless sky, like a stream making its way toward the sea, effortlessly, naturally, peacefully. The night settled gently over the valley. The stars stretched endlessly across the sky. The stream continued its quiet song beneath the moonlight. Everything seemed softer now, slower, calmer. The world was no longer asking for anything. There were no tasks to complete, no problems to solve, no destinations to reach. Only the quiet unfolding of this moment. Robert sat comfortably beneath the old oak tree, the same tree that had watched over so many conversations, the same tree that had stood through countless seasons. Storms had come, storms had gone, winter had arrived, spring had returned, yet the tree remained, patient, still, rooted. As he looked at the great tree, Robert noticed something. The tree never hurried. It never worried about tomorrow. It never regretted yesterday. It simply stood where it was, fully present, fully alive. Perhaps wisdom looks something like that. Not knowing everything, not controlling everything, simply being completely here. A gentle breeze moved through the branches. The leaves responded with a soft whisper. The sound reminded Robert of distant waves touching a shoreline. Steady, rhythmic, peaceful. He closed his eyes. The darkness behind his eyelids felt warm and comforting. His breathing slowed naturally. In and out, in and out. The stream continued flowing nearby, its sound blending with the wind, blending with the night, blending with the silence itself. And as Robert listened, it became harder to tell where one sound ended and another began. Everything seemed connected. The water, the wind, the trees, the stars, the earth, and himself, not separate, part of the same great movement, part of the same mysterious dance of life. A long time ago, Robert believed peace was something he needed to find, some hidden destination, some secret understanding, some distant achievement. Now he knew differently. Peace had never been lost, only overlooked, hidden beneath rushing, hidden beneath worry, hidden beneath endless thinking, like the stars hidden behind daylight, always present, even when unseen. The moon climbed higher into the sky. Silver light touched the tops of the trees. The stream shimmered softly. The world appeared almost dreamlike, as though nature itself were preparing for sleep. Robert imagined the entire valley resting. The houses, the gardens, the fields, the birds tucked safely into their nests. Even the trees seemed to be resting, not asleep, but resting within their own stillness. The thought brought a smile to his face. For so many years, he had forgotten how to rest. Even when sitting still, his mind had been running. Even when lying in bed, his thoughts had been working, always moving, always planning, always chasing. Tonight, there was nothing left to chase. The stream had taught him that. The stars had taught him that. Life itself had taught him that. Everything arrives when it arrives. Everything leaves when it leaves. And between those moments, there's only this breath, this heartbeat, this beautiful, fleeting moment of being alive. The night grew deeper. The silence grew richer. The world seemed to exhale. And Robert felt himself exhaling too, letting go of effort, letting go of expectations, letting go of resistance. Just for now, just for tonight. The earth beneath him felt steady, supportive, ancient. The sky above felt endless, open, infinite. And somewhere between earth and sky, Robert rested peacefully, no longer carrying the weight of the past, no longer borrowing fears from the future, simply resting in the only place life had ever existed. Here, now. The stream continued flowing. The stars continued shining. The moon continued its slow journey across the sky, and Robert sat quietly within all, listening, breathing, being, until eventually even those words became unnecessary. There was only awareness, only stillness, only peace, the kind of peace that asks for nothing, the kind of peace that has nowhere to go. The kind of peace that has been waiting patiently beneath every thought, beneath every fear, beneath every story, and resting there, in that vast and gentle silence, Robert felt completely at home, as though he had finally arrived, not at the end of a journey, but at the beginning of a new way of seeing life, a way that required nothing, a way that welcomed everything. The stars shined overhead. The stream whispered softly through the darkness, and the night carried him gently toward rest, toward stillness, toward sleep, like a leaf floating effortlessly upon calm water, like a cloud drifting across an endless sky, like a wave returning peacefully to the ocean, without struggle, without fear, without effort, only peace, only silence, only rest. Far beyond the valley, beyond the stream, beyond the small town where Robert lived, another morning was beginning. The first rays of sunlight stretched across distant fields. Birds stirred softly among the branches. The world awakened once more, and life continued exactly as it always had, quietly, patiently, without hurry. Robert sat on his porch with a warm blanket draped across his shoulders. A cup of tea rested beside him. Steam curled gently into the cool morning air. The garden glowed beneath the early sunlight. Every flower seemed alive with color. Every leaf shimmered with dew. The beauty was simple, yet somehow it felt complete. For a long time, Robert simply watched. No thoughts demanding attention. No plans needing to be made. Only awareness. Only presence. Only this moment. As the morning unfolded, he remembered something he had once read many years ago. A sentence he had forgotten until now. It said, "Wherever you go, there you are." At the time, the words had seemed ordinary. Now they felt profound, because he had spent most of his life believing peace existed somewhere else. In another place, another time, another version of himself. Yet wherever he went, he carried the same mind, the same worries, the same habits, the same endless search. Only when he stopped searching did he discover what had always been present. The peace of simply being. The sun climbed higher. The garden grew warmer. A butterfly landed briefly on a nearby flower, then drifted away. Robert watched it disappear, not wishing it would stay, not feeling sadness as it left, simply appreciating the brief moment it had appeared. Life seemed full of such moments. Arrivals, departures, meetings, goodbyes, each one beautiful because it did not last forever. The day passed slowly. Clouds moved across the sky. The wind shifted direction. The shadows changed. The world remained in motion, and Robert remained at peace within that motion. He no longer needed life to stand still. He no longer needed certainty. He no longer needed guarantees. Life could change. People could change. Circumstances could change. And peace could still remain. Because peace was not found in controlling the world. Peace was found in how he met the world. The afternoon faded into evening. The sky softened into shades of amber and violet. The familiar stars began appearing overhead, one by one, as they always had, as they always would. Robert looked up, and a quiet gratitude filled his heart. Not gratitude for any particular achievement, not gratitude for success, simply gratitude for existence itself, for breath, for sunlight, for rain, for friendship, for love, for loss, for every experience that had shaped the journey, even the difficult ones, especially the difficult ones, because without them, he may never have learned how to see. The night deepened. The stars multiplied. The stream continued its endless song somewhere beyond the darkness. And as Robert listened, he realized something beautiful. The stream had never been teaching him how to escape life. It had been teaching him how to enter life fully, to be present, to be awake, to be here, no matter what appeared, no matter what disappeared. The wind moved softly through the trees. The garden rested beneath the moonlight. The world seemed wrapped in peace. And for a long moment, Robert closed his eyes, feeling the cool air upon his skin, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, feeling the quiet miracle of being alive. Nothing needed to be added. Nothing needed to be removed. This moment was enough, exactly as it was. The stars shined overhead. The earth turned silently beneath him. And somewhere in the vast stillness of the night, Robert smiled, not because he had reached the end of journey, but because he had finally stopped trying to arrive anywhere else. Life was here. This breath was here. This moment was here. And that was enough. More than enough. As the night carried him gently toward rest, the stream continued flowing through the darkness. The moon continued watching over the sleeping world. The stars continued shining beyond measure. And within the great silence of existence, everything unfolded exactly as it always had. Effortlessly, naturally, peacefully. The breath came. The breath went. The moment came. The moment went. The stream flowed. The stars shined. The night deepened. and all was well. Good night. Rest deeply. Rest peacefully. And remember, the peace you seek is not waiting for you tomorrow. It is here, in this breath, in this moment, in the quiet awareness that has been with you all along. And there, within that stillness, surrounded by the endless sky and the gentle song of the stream, Robert finally allowed himself to rest completely. Not searching, not striving, not becoming, simply being. And in that being, he found everything he had ever been looking for. Not far from Robert's town lived a woman named Sarah. Sarah was 72 years old. She lived alone in a small white house at the edge of a quiet countryside road. From the outside, her life appeared peaceful. The curtains were always neatly arranged. The garden was carefully maintained. The front porch was swept clean every morning. Everything looked orderly. Everything looked calm. But appearances can be misleading, because inside that little white house, Sarah carried a loneliness she rarely spoke about. Her husband, Daniel, had passed away 6 years earlier. They had been married for nearly 50 years. Half a century of shared mornings, shared meals, shared conversations, shared dreams. And then one day, he was gone. The silence that followed never truly left. At first, friends visited often. Neighbors checked on her. Her children called regularly. But as the years passed, life continued moving forward. People became busy. Schedules filled. The visits became less frequent. The phone rang less often. And little by little, Sarah found herself spending more time alone. Most mornings followed the same pattern. She woke before sunrise, made a cup of tea, sat by the kitchen window, and watched the world begin another day. The birds still sang. The sun still rose. The seasons still changed. Yet something felt missing. Not because life was empty, but because someone important was no longer there to share it. One spring morning, Sarah stepped outside and walked toward the back of her property. Behind her house was a small lavender garden. Years ago, Daniel had planted it for her. Lavender had always been her favorite flower. Every summer, the garden filled with soft purple blossoms, their fragrance drifting gently through the air. When Daniel was alive, they often sat beside the lavender together, watching sunsets, sharing stories, saying very little, yet somehow feeling completely understood. Now the garden remained, but Daniel did not. Sarah stood among the flowers. A soft breeze moved through the lavender stems. The scent immediately awakened old memories. For a moment, she could almost hear his voice, almost hear his laughter, almost feel his presence beside her. Tears filled her eyes, not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly, like rain beginning to fall. She lowered herself onto a small wooden bench near the garden and sat there for a long time. The flowers swayed gently around her. The sky above was bright and clear. The world seemed beautiful, yet her heart felt heavy. Eventually, she whispered something she had never spoken aloud. "I don't know how to do this without you." The words disappeared into the breeze. No answer came, only silence. The same silence she had been carrying for years. But as she sat there, something unexpected happened. A butterfly drifted into the garden. Its wings shimmered softly in the sunlight. Without hurry, it moved from flower to flower, completely present, completely at ease. Sarah watched it carefully. The butterfly stayed only a few moments before continuing on its journey. Yet somehow its brief visit touched her heart, because it reminded her of something. Nothing stays forever. Not flowers, not seasons, not butterflies, not even the people we love. For years, Sarah had been fighting this truth, fighting change, fighting loss, fighting reality itself. And perhaps that was why the pain felt so heavy. The lavender continued moving in the breeze. The butterfly disappeared into the distance. The sky remained vast and open above her. And for the first time in many years, Sarah allowed herself to simply sit with her grief. Not push it away, not fix it, not escape it. Just sit beside it, the way one might sit beside an old friend. The afternoon passed quietly. The sunlight shifted. The shadows grew longer. The fragrance of lavender filled the air. And slowly, very slowly, something inside Sarah softened. Not healed, not solved, simply softened, as though her heart had finally become tired of fighting. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like the beginning of something. Not an ending, a beginning. A beginning she could not yet understand, but a beginning nonetheless. The breeze continued moving through the lavender. The sky slowly turned golden. And somewhere deep within the silence, life quietly prepared its next lesson. The following evening, Robert returned to the stream one final time. The sun hung low above the horizon. Golden light shimmered across the moving water. The familiar oak tree stood quietly nearby. Everything looked exactly as it had on the day he first arrived. And yet, everything was different, because he was different. The stream continued flowing, just as it always had. The water moved around stones, past fallen branches, toward destinations unseen, never stopping, never hesitating, never looking back. Robert sat quietly on the old bench. No questions remained. No answers were needed.